Yeah, I think the first thing to say about COVID has been that it hasn't discriminated between urban or rural. And I think that has been the overriding factor regarding the impact of the pandemic. But certainly there's been a change in the movement of people. And Emmett, I'm sure you share that in the area that you cover.
Yeah, I'm based in Bettystown, Barry, as you know, which has historically been a kind of a Dublin commuter town. And you would have seen just literally, aside from anecdotal evidence, you just see from the amount of people that are around the place that people are staying within the community now. People are using the main community facility where we are as the beach. And just see a higher population of people there day to day. People drinking more coffees, people in the shops, people parking in and around the area. So that's been a marked change, I think. And I think you're going to see a change from the likes of people commuting from Drogheda and Bettystown in to spending a lot more time in their local areas. Look, Bettystown's a lovely place. Drogheda's a nice place right by the sea. They're an hour from Dublin. A lot of people would have bought houses and stuff there because of that reason. But there's benefits to the area now that people can see and are going to stay. And I think you'll see a change in terms of the economic structure of the area and the community structure of the area, because people are going to be spending more time. You're going to see a need for more restaurants and coffee shops, but also I think you're going to see people getting more involved in their GAA club or, in the golf club or the tennis club or whatever, because, they have that little bit more time to spend in the community.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And I think it's where rural communities have actually started to look introspectively somewhat, in that they're now starting to look around them and see where are there voids in their services, or where is there shortages of supply, or what is it that is missing in their communities. And for some that will be access to childcare, for some that will be access to elderly care, for some it will be sporting opportunities. And I think these communities, once they get back out of this pandemic and they start to once again, I suppose, share some time together, I think that's going to start them to identify actually what is the missing piece of infrastructure in their communities. And I think they will reflect on that time that they had spent perhaps commuting, for those that were moving to the larger urban centres, and starting to value some of the local services that are there and how they can be improved upon. So I'm sensing there'll be quite a bit of change. I think the urban setting has a different challenge, perhaps. The social enterprises, if you like, from urban centres, it's about how do they change their direction somewhat, perhaps, if there is a reduced footfall. So I think there's a number of things that will be reflected upon as a result of the pandemic. Yeah, and it is a double-edged sword, I think, because the rural has had, a large element of isolation. Now, rural isolation was the challenge before COVID came along, but now you have individual isolation where the elderly may have stayed to themselves, groupings couldn't happen, or gatherings, matches weren't on, masses weren't on, if you like, a lot of normal things that took place in rural life, and in the urban setting where there's a far greater diversity often. They're challenged with the mobility issue, and that, as you pointed out, there's people now working from home, there's remote working, there is the establishment of hubs. And I think we're going to see a diverse level of requirement that for the likes of Community Finance Ireland and the Recovery Loan Fund, I think that's where opportunities will be. And we've seen it across the full spectrum. If you were to take in South Kilkenny, it was childcare where we supported Danesfort with an extension to their facility, a community creche facility. We've seen it in the elderly where Euros Community Hospital extended their hospital for elderly care. And we're alone, who work obviously with the elderly as a national charity, where we supported them on housing. So I think for Community Finance Ireland, we're going to see the result of some of this change. And I think the change has been accelerated as a result of the pandemic and people's realisation as to the value of local services, and perhaps the time, as you referenced, that they now have to focus perhaps on local issues.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say they're faith-based opportunities are now arising because that wider call for everyone to get back, be it in whatever setting, that dynamic will change now. And we've seen examples of people approaching us now from the faith community for bigger premises or bigger meeting places to allow them to meet up comfortably, but also recognizing, that, the meeting up and that sense of community is still going to be very important going forward. So it's a case of, Community Finance Ireland being there to meet that diversity and that inclusivity. And we're going to showcase, I suppose, our adaptability for these changed times, and some, harping on about the strengths, I suppose, that Community Finance has in terms of, our appetite for these new projects, our agility, turnaround times. I think the fact that we're here to meet people and, access to our services is going to be a key thing, because I think one of the things that the pandemic has brought to the fore is that people, despite being isolated or whatever, want to deal with people. And I think that's a key strength that we provide vis-a-vis our competitors on the high street.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it goes back, even if you're to look at, the core values of Community Finance Ireland in terms of integrity and quality and empathy. And maybe empathy has really come to the fore in understanding some of the challenges that not-for-profit groups have as a result of the pandemic, where, some have had to change their model altogether, and some have had a severe loss of income. But the government, to be fair and to call out and credit, our Rural Future was launched at the end of March by the Department of Community and Rural Development. I think is going to be an important blueprint. There's considerable funding has gone into the area of community and not-for-profit groups, and it's been necessary to allow them to self-sustain. But the reality of it is that, government isn't going to provide a wholesome fulfillment of every service or provision of access to service, and some will take that at a local level to drive it forward. And I think we'll see that. I think, the remote working has certainly come to the fore. Obviously, the Connected Hubs initiative, I think, will a network across Ireland will drive across the remote working example, and it'll be that type of investment, some that will be taken on at local level, some that Community Finance Ireland have supported in recent times, the example being most recent probably the Sneem Digital Hub. But it is going to be a change of way of life in some regards for some communities, and they've never been short though in both their adaptability, I suppose, and their ability to pivot towards what the next challenge perhaps is.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. I think credit has to be given to the government and Heather Humphrey's department there, because while some of the supports, some of our communities mightn't be able to access, but I think what it will do is stimulate that demand when they can see, particularly with the Working Hubs initiative, like you referenced Sneem there, and we have our colleagues in Ireland, Kilshimott there as well. But I think communities talk to each other. You can see that across the GAA piece, and when they see facilities going up, in other communities, I think that will stimulate a demand. And I think we have the expertise there in that we will have worked with these communities, we'll say in Sneem or Kilshimott, or even our colleagues in the Dublin Food Co-op, and we can bring that expertise to bear on any communities that do approach us. We know the ropes and we can show the ropes. And I think a large part of what we do, whether a project or a community is ready or not, is that we can, position ourselves in an advisory aspect as well, and maybe, handhold a group through a project, which some of them can be of quite big scale. And I think that the expertise we have locally is a real asset in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the dedicated point of contact within Community Finance Ireland for not-for-profit groups who, as you say, some larger capital projects can be quite daunting depending on the skill set within their community. And so I think it is somewhere that Community Finance Ireland can assist in, and I certainly believe that, green and open space is something we've all come to cherish. And it's another area where we've seen, great investment in blueways and greenways, but also at local levels and indeed in Kildare, where Castledermot Amenity Group, together with the council and the local development company, came together to produce a beautiful amenity area that provided for all ages, including a hardscape park and such forth. So there is definitely opportunity, and I say it is definitely a place, I think, where Community Finance Ireland can assist these groups, as you say, not only with perhaps the finance, but also with some guidance. I think following on, Emmett, from our discussion around the impact of COVID, the supports that are going to be required for communities moving forward, I think, is going to change somewhat also in terms of, be it their infrastructure or their economy or the makeup of their own pop community. But there's great opportunity within it, I think, that the pandemic maybe has shone a light on, and that in some communities is perhaps the age profile of community groups and the actual committee members, and the opportunity now perhaps with people working remotely who, as you referenced earlier, have more time to bring them in onto committees and allow their voices be heard, I think, in terms of what they would like to see in their community, because their view will differ and they may be new to the community and they may have a different ideological thought about what they would like to see in their community or in their village or town. So I think that different aspect actually will give opportunities to communities to shine a light in other areas than perhaps what traditionally has been looked at.
Yeah, I think, it comes back to the concept of time, and that if you are seeing people maybe staying within a community, that you're going to see, a diversity of ideas and maybe a different approach and maybe a different energy coming to communities. I think as well, if people are going to be spending more time there, that particularly with our younger people, that we need to get that sort of sense of sustainability. I'm thinking about the 10 or 20 year future, from a local community perspective. So if you're getting young people involved that may well have been commuting to Dublin, that you kind of get them involved maybe at an earlier age, so they can bring that different perspective and different ideas, and maybe have a different viewpoint on things like, community energy projects, or, we've referenced the community working piece again, but I think they might also bring a different perspective in terms of their education, and maybe education is something that needs to be looked at in that rural sense, so maybe you can see with these hubs going to be popping up, that there's going to be maybe local education opportunities for people, be it through digital, through food, through energy, through any of the kind of topical things that are going to be key for the future, for the next 20 years and part of government policy. I think that maybe younger people will bring a different perspective to that, and meshed with the experience of more experienced people that are well versed in community groups. It could be a fairly potent mix.
Yeah, I certainly when I speak with community groups, there has been perhaps a legacy issue of focusing on the physical assets that they have within their villages or towns in terms of what infrastructure is available. But the greatest asset, of course, is the human asset, and some new dwellers perhaps to communities, or for some that maybe hadn't integrated in previous times and now have met in the park on their walks or in their free time, that now they're working remotely. They have a skill set that they can bring into that committee, and that's where the opportunity really lies. For some groups that are looking to be perhaps more progressive in terms of developing out different services or adding on new services. And we've certainly seen it in a number of examples in Askamore, in my own county, in Wexford, who've continuously evolved a former school. They've added on now what will be a digital hub in essence, that was previously used for training and meeting room purposes. And on top of that, they've added on digital recording, for example, for the likes now of the mediums we're now using that have become day to day. And those new thoughts and new people that have come into the council in Askamore have brought some new ideas that they are developing out. And with support from the likes of Community Finance Ireland and the recovery loan, will be able to continue to support those communities, develop those, and add on to the existing services that they provide. So it's definitely, as you say, a mesh of what has the existing have often excelled at providing for their communities, but also the bolting on of new services that are now required in today's modern life, I suppose, in a remote fashion that allows those people to also invest in their community, where previously perhaps that time was lost to a commute or other circumstance.
Yeah, and we would have, I suppose, a footprint in our communities there in terms of family resource centres. I'm thinking of in Nadini in Dundalk and places like that. But I think one of the challenges that if people are going to be working from a remote perspective, or you're still going to have the service needs, the service requirements in terms of childcare, in terms of broadband, in terms of energy. So I think there's a role there for Community Finance Ireland, given the experience we have with groups like Iad Nadini or other family resource centres that we finance. That you can use these as a blueprint, and maybe the new ideas that we've spoken about there can future-proof those for the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, and you referenced, I suppose, a wider consideration perhaps by some of our sporting clubs. We've seen sporting clubs more than ever, I think, invest in wider community assets, in particular the likes of perimeter walkways in their grounds, floodlighting of areas to make it safer. And these are beyond the membership base, who in sports clubs are generally the younger active age, but actually in the reverse of some of the community groups, the sports clubs are realizing the importance of their wider community, and maybe those that are past their playing days, and they enjoy the walking perhaps or exercise aspect to keep themselves both mentally and physically well, which has become a huge area in terms of providing safe environment for those types of activity. And we've seen it. We've seen it certainly in a number of clubs, Kappa in County Kildare, for example, recently Donard Glen in County Wicklow, just a couple to mention in recent times. But there has been a whole host of clubs that have now looked beyond membership base, and they've realised that for their continued development, it's beyond the membership base that actually contribute to the well-being and fabric of the club. And they are now starting to provide, and some have been for some time, but some are now providing services over and above what typically has been into club playing membership-based activity. So it's a huge role for clubs like that to play, where again, you're looking at a full spectrum of age groups. A recent club in Kilkenny that we recently supported even showed, an age profile on their membership base of 4 to 81. So I think that's a reasonable spread covered.
It's a good spread. Yeah, and funny that the physical health thing is very important in terms of walkways, and that's something that we would have financed in a wide number of GAA clubs. But I think the spotlight has put a bit of a focus on mental health as well, and I think that, aside from all you referenced there, you're looking after our human assets. And I think that the pandemic has shone a bit of a light on, isolation, rural isolation in particular, but also, people that may be working from home. So we have seen, we have a client there, Let's Get Talking, which has seen, a fairly robust expansion across the country over the 14 or 15 months of the pandemic. And I think that, all the skills, and all the physical activity, are all fantastic. But I think, in a wider sense, I think society is looking at mental health as an issue. And I think that community supports there are going to be key as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's well proven at this stage, physical activity is positive on one's mental health. And for those that live in a rural setting, I suppose they maybe have a greater opportunity for green areas and recreational facilities, perhaps. But conversely, a lot of our urban centres have now targeted open space and trying to develop community assets where recreation, amenity, I reference Castledermot there in County Kildare and what they've provided for their village. And again, you're going to see more of it, I think, in the sense that how we use our downtime, where it had been perhaps in some instances completely absorbed by the commute. The remote working, the digital hub will perhaps give opportunity there, but on top of that, the physical exercise or the well-being element, be that through a gentle walk or something more robust, I think will throw a light again as to how important that actually is for one's mental health. And it's good to see the likes of Let's Get Talking, have that success, but it's the unfortunate side that their demand is as a result, and sometimes for those that are now challenged by what the pandemic has brought.
Absolutely, yeah, and maybe with these community hubs, I mean, hopefully we will see that maybe that it isn't just about working. That you will see that mesh of services and inclusivity and diversity, and it might allow people that are maybe working in a silo, say in Dublin or whatever, but to be exposed to a broader range of people across a broader range of services and industries, perhaps, but also, to be exposed on a day-to-day to their community, and maybe just to allow them to drive, that multifaceted approach of, physical activity, community involvement, mental health, sporting and working, which hopefully as well, aside from all those kind of social impacts, will drive economic outcomes as well for a community.
Yeah, and it's reasonable to call out, I think, the positive impact that the not-for-profit community has done during the pandemic. We have seen, particularly early stage in the pandemic, where there was a lot of, if you like, people cocooning, be it from an underlying health reason, or be it from elderly age, or from I suppose a degree of apprehension around being mobile with the early onset of COVID. And a lot of the clubs and not-for-profit stepped in, in terms of providing services, getting prescriptions, doing Meals on Wheels, providing basic provisions to those groupings, and they will be recognised, I believe, when things start to free out again, as we start to hopefully place this pandemic behind us, and the addition of services and additional events that hopefully we'll all enjoy in the short term. I think you will find that they will be well supported as a recompense or a reciprocation of the support they were given during the early stages.
Just leading on there, Barry, from our last discussions there, and we've talked at length, I suppose, about the impact of COVID-19 on rural and urban communities. But I think a challenge going forward, or an opportunity more so than a challenge, is going to be the green energy piece. We will, of course, have done a lot of retrofitting projects in the past, but I think that the pandemic has probably shone a light on a lot of people's premises, or their focus on green ideas such as retrofitting. And I'm thinking of, I have a client there who approached us, the Full Employment Trust. They're an organisation for unemployed people, but they have a premises that is venerable, we'll say, in inner city Dublin there, and they're looking at an opportunity to retrofit with the assistance of ourselves and the SEAI to probably future-proof that building for the organisation for the next 30 years, and fit in with that efficient green energy piece. I mean, I don't know if you have examples of that as well.
Yes, certainly. Obviously, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, the SEAI, have done important work in this regard, and bringing, I suppose, what were unwelcoming places into more welcoming places. And for some of those, it's been key, because some of them, as I referenced to some groups, I put my coat on when I went in rather than took it off. And I suppose that in its sense told you maybe at the state of the actual premises itself. It's been evident to me over the years when, you see more silicone than brick, there's usually drafts and condensation and general dampness that doesn't bode well for those that have any sort of an underlying illness, or maybe those that are infirmed in some way, or maybe in the elderly age bracket. And we have been able to support them here in Community Finance Ireland in those upgrades and retrofits. Certainly in my own county, again, in Blackwater, the community parish hall was completely upgraded with both our assistance in Community Finance Ireland, indeed the local authority and the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. And it's those collaborations, I think, that can lead to the greatest outcome, because it is not only a number of stakeholders that are in a role to assist and guide and support financially, but also it brings in a wider community piece, again, across the full age bracket. And sustainability has become a topical item in recent years, and rightly so. And we're all starting to use, I suppose, the knowledge that we've now yearned that over the years to understand, I suppose, what does our own carbon footprint look like as a community or as an individual. And we've seen some great examples. In Tombrack outside Enniscorthy in County Wexford, they created a biodiversity garden beside the local national school. And what it has been able to be done with it was, they have looked to producing their own food. But B, they've been able to use it as an educational tool for ecology and general knowledge around plant growth, how we can generate our own food locally. You referenced what can be done at a local level. Likewise, Grow It Yourself in Waterford, a very well-renowned social enterprise at this stage that Community Finance Ireland were able to support. Again, looking at the idea of how do we take out the air miles out of food? How do we bring it into the educational setting? And GIY, the local initiatives like Tombrack, and those will all engage their local communities around sustainability. And part of that is going to be, as an add-on, I believe, the green energy piece. And we're starting to see signs of that, aren't we?
We are. Well, we're seeing the approaches that have been made now, and it goes back to that idea of education and communication. You know, communities speak to each other, and you know, we've a number of examples, both from an urban perspective and a rural perspective. And I'm thinking of Dublin Food Co-op from a food perspective. I'm thinking of Cuhullins, you know, who are a GAA club, but also, you know, brought in that biodiversity piece. I'm thinking of the Inishowen Rivers Trust, who are bringing that education, that wider education piece to the community. And I think that's going to be a byproduct of communities maybe focusing on these topical ideas, that the green energy piece, that it's a byproduct of people being together, and that, you know, percolation of ideas. And, you know, we all have the wider sense of, you know, the electric cars, you know, your solar panels on your roof. That's all at a very individual level, but I think that's sort of allowing the conversation to formulate at a community level, and seeing, you know, the wider benefits of investing in this for our community, and, you know, educating our young people and our kids, you know, to keep the country. Like, we have a beautiful country here, and as well we know. And I think if the education piece is coming down through generations, I think it makes for a very exciting future, and, you know, the longer term sustainability of this country. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And just to go back to your point there about, you know, the change in commuting habits, or, you know, maybe the change that pandemic has brought about in terms of maybe unemployment, or, you know, some of the high street issues that we're seeing across hospitality, maybe, and, you know, the pub sector and stuff. But I think the Irish people are very entrepreneurial, and I think that the community setting can bring that to the fore. And I think this recovery loan fund, as well as providing cash support and all the strong aspects, you know, in terms of fast decisions and you know, the human touch, you know, Community Finance Ireland provides an advisory piece as much as, you know, the financial piece as well. Like, we're not just, to use that phrase, you know, a checkbook. You know, we're here from an advisory perspective as well, and we will have that experience, you know, of dealing with community entrepreneurs in the past. And I think that the entrepreneurial and the sustainable side of the community is coming to the fore now. And I think that in terms of you know, having a meeting or having an advisory chat, or just a general discussion around these wider sustainability energy issues and the green question, we're here to provide that service as much as the financial service as well.
Absolutely. And I think again, to credit government, there's been opportunity purely on energy in recent years with the launch of the RES scheme, which has allowed actual groups to become a utility provider and generate their own electricity within their community groups. And I think back to the reference on sustainability, energy and circular economy, I think we will see a greater collaboration between private householders, businesses, community groups, for the likes of the Better Energy community schemes in the social Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland through the BEC scheme there, and indeed through RES, which is now letting ultimately individual community groups produce energy, and what isn't used locally, they are actually paid for by it going back into the national grid, which has been a void in Ireland for some time, but is now being addressed. And thankfully, in the first round of it, there was 9 community groups that have been awarded that capacity to generate electricity within their community. And I think the energy piece is one to watch, and certainly something that Community Finance Ireland are hearing more about, and certainly something within Community Finance Ireland we're eager to hear more about, because we recognise how local investment results in local both recognition, but also in integration at a local level. Emmett, we've spoken a lot, I suppose, about the opportunities for Community Finance Ireland as a result of COVID, and perhaps where some of the requests and asks will be of us. Our new loan recovery fund, I think this is going to be well placed and well received to meet that requirement, won't it?
I think it will, Barry. I mean, look, we've spoken at length about, what we can do, but I mean, just to go over the kind of key points of what Community Finance Ireland's recovery loans will cover. I mean, it's a €10 million fund. It's an all-island fund, which I think is important. Zero arrangement fee is another key facet of it, which I think makes us the only social finance provider, to provide that. Penalty for an early repayment, we have an appetite for unsecured borrowing. We don't look for personal guarantees.
There's a lot there to appeal, I think. If you think about, perhaps what is asked of people and volunteers who lead a lot of not-for-profit organisations or social enterprises, I think obviously to minimise the cost through the lack of arrangement fee. I think the fact that personal guarantees aren't sought, is hugely important for volunteers who are giving up their time voluntarily, and to be asked to be personally liable for a borrowing is a huge ask.
No.
I think the flexibility of the loan offering, whether it's short-term bridging finance for a predefined repayment source, or whether it's longer-term investment up to 15 years, I think it gives a great ability for us to meet the requirement that's going to come from the sector.
Absolutely. And look, the way we position this, Barry, is that we're fair, we're fast, we're flexible. We'll give a decision within receiving all the information within a 48-hour time frame. And you reference cost there. I think that's important. We don't want to overburden community groups. We want to be fair in how we treat them. We're not into personal guarantees, and we realise that people's time is precious to them. So I think the 48-hour turnaround time gives people certainty and gives them that bit of confidence in that the work they need to do, that worrying about the finance is going to be the least of their worries, that we can have the decision and give them the confidence to go and move forward with their project.